The rain had beaten the soot into black tears upon our window panes, and the fire on Baker Street burned with a low red heart that gave more colour than heat. Holmes had not touched his violin, and the room lay so still that I could hear the ash settle in the grate, and the far muffled labour of the cabs beyond the glass. Then, from the hand of the lady who had half risen from our hearth rug as if to fly and yet had no refuge in the world, there came a small metallic ticking, thin, urgent and unnatural, and to my amazement the silver watch she thrust toward Holmes showed its second hand moving steadily backwards. It was one of those moments in which the commonplace shell of life cracks sharply and some singular, sinister thing looks through. The lady herself was young, though fear and sleeplessness had drawn a fine shadow beneath her eyes. Her dress was of excellent material, but ill fastened at the throat in the haste of departure. One glove was buttoned to the wrist, the other had been dragged on and left unclosed. The wet on her skirt had dried in a line of grey upon the hem, and there were stains of the yellow clay of the suburban platforms upon the narrow sole of her boot. Holmes took the watch, not from eagerness, but with that cool and exact courtesy which was never more marked than when some extraordinary object lay before him. "You have come from the south-western line," said he. "You changed once after leaving a carriage, and you have had no breakfast worth naming. Sit down, Miss Broad," said she, sinking rather than sitting into the chair I had pushed forward. "Nora Broad. If you know my name already, sir, then for heaven's sake know also whether I am mad." Holmes held the watch flat upon his palm. The thin, dry ticking went on between us with the persistence of a beetle tapping in wood. "No," said he, "but someone has found it useful that others should think so. Watson, put the lamp nearer." When I did so, the little instrument showed more clearly. It was a plain silver hunting watch, somewhat old-fashioned in make. The case had been bruised at one edge, and there was a hairline fracture across the crystal. The hands moved, but they moved wrong. The second hand jerked back from mark to mark, and the minute hand, so slowly that I should not at first have sworn to it, was creeping in the same reverse direction. "It was found upon my uncle's floor," said Miss Broad, "near his hand. He was dead. The door was bolted upon the inside, and yet Mr. Dorrington says Captain Bell killed him and left by the window. Captain Bell says Mr. Dorrington lies. Doctor, Straker says grief has unhinged me, because I told them that this watch was not my uncle's, and that I had heard it before, heard it in the passage outside his study door, when no one was there. They are sending me away tonight." Holmes looked up sharply. "Sending you where?" "To a house near Dieppe first, and afterwards to a private establishment in Lausanne. The arrangements are made. Mr. Dorrington has the papers. Doctor, Straker and another physician have signed them, or are to sign them. I am told it is for my health, because I am distressed, because I do not sleep, because I insist upon what no one else appears to have noticed. My uncle was Sir Matthew Broad, of Crooked Oaks, near Esher. He died yesterday evening. If I am taken from England before 11 tonight, I shall never again be mistress of my own liberty." Her voice had not risen. That was the convincing part of it. There was no feverish declamation, no theatrical emphasis. She spoke as a tired creature speaks whose fear has gone too deep for gesture. I observed that Holmes's eyes, which had been fixed upon the watch, moved for an instant to her face and rested there with a kindness he rarely permitted to show. "At what hour are you to leave?" said he. "The carriage is ordered for 9:30. We are to catch the boat train after 11. If I refuse, they will say my refusal proves the need for restraint. And why should your removal serve any person's interest? Because on the morning after tomorrow, if I remain free, I attend with my uncle's solicitor, Mr. Jasper Dorrington, to open the sealed trust packet at Maddox's Bank in Chancery Lane. My mother's fortune, which has always been under trusteeship, comes under my control when I sign. My uncle told me so. 3 days ago he quarrelled violently with Mr. Dorrington over those papers. I heard my own name, and the words "before she knows." Yesterday he was dead. Tonight I am to be put away." Holmes laid the watch against his ear, then turned it over, glanced at the hinge, and gave it a slight sniff, like a chemist testing some faint reagent. "Did your uncle carry a watch?" "He detested them if they ticked. There is not a clock in the house, save one in the servants' hall and one in the stable yard. He said he would not have time nagging at him from every shelf. He used to make us wind our watches in our rooms. Yet this one ticked in a passage outside his study door?" "Yes, and you told them so." "I told Captain Bell first. He believed me. Then I told Dr. Straker. He asked how much I had slept, and whether I was subject to fancies. Then I told Mr. Ferker. Dorrington, he smiled, and said that sorrow commonly takes a mechanical form in impressionable natures. Holmes handed the watch to me. "Observe, Watson, there are 2 smears of fresh black upon the inner rim, finger and thumb, but not from use. Also a trace of oil unlike the ordinary watchmaker's oil, heavier, more adhesive. The hinge is new. The bow is worn old. A marriage." He rose in one quick elastic movement, crossed to the mantel, and rang. "You believe me?" cried Miss Broad. "I believe," said Holmes, "that you have been within 6 feet of a man who oils metal with his own hands, that your uncle's death was not simplified by those about him, and that if we remain here talking you may presently be beyond our reach. Watson, your hat. Mrs. Hudson will oblige us with a hansom. Miss Broad, you will return with us at once." She caught her breath in a manner that was almost a sob, though no tears came. "You are very good," said she. Holmes had already taken his coat from the peg. "Not at all. I have an objection to any arrangement by which a sane young lady is packed out of England between dinner and midnight. Besides, I confess that I have not every day the privilege of making the acquaintance of a watch which rejects the forward tendency of civilization." The drive to Esher was one of those wet winter journeys which appear to strip London from a man in layers. The glare and rattle sank behind us, the lamps thinned, the road broadened into blackness with pale ditches shining here and there under the splash of our wheels. Holmes said little. Once or twice he opened the watch in the hollow of his hand, screened by the carriage lamp, and bent over it with the absorbed stillness of a priest above a relic. Miss Broad sat opposite to us. Her courage, which had carried her to Baker Street, seemed to flag now that Aid was actually beside her, and more than once I saw her fingers wander unconsciously toward the little reticule in which the watch lay. Each time, as if in answer to that movement, I fancied that I heard through the jolting of the cab the faint dry tick, 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 beating against the rain. Crooked Oaks stood back from the road behind a sweep of dripping laurels. It was a broad, low house of dark brick, with long windows upon the lower floor and a portico which gave a grudging shelter from the weather. A lamp burned in the hall. Before we had mounted the steps the door opened, and a gaunt woman in black silk, with a bunch of keys at her side, stood rigid upon the threshold. "Miss Nora," she cried. "Miss Dorrington said you had gone only to the rectory." "I have brought Mr. Sherlock Holmes," said Miss Broad. The woman's face changed very little, yet I saw a tightening about the mouth. Then I had best inform Mr. Dorrington at once. "This way, if you please, gentlemen, Mrs. Colby, sir." The housekeeper. The hall into which we stepped was lit more strongly than I had expected, but it was singularly hushed. One had that disagreeable impression, familiar in houses where death has lately entered, that every door concealed some listening presence. The air smelt of damp wool, lamp oil, and the faint sweetness of hothouse flowers from a room to the right. A man came out from the farther end of the corridor with the quick smoothness of one who never seems to hurry and yet is always exactly in place. He was of middle height, spare, carefully dressed, and so correct in all externals that the eye passed him at first without arrest. Then one noticed the pallor, not of ill health but of indoor habit, the close composed lips, the pince nez which he removed and polished even while advancing, and the singular softness of the voice in which no emotion, however strong, could have left any roughness. "Miss Broad," said he, "you have alarmed us excessively. Mr. Sherlock Holmes, unless I mistake. Jasper Dorrington, of Dorrington and Hale. We are honoured, though the moment is somewhat unfortunate." Holmes shook hands. A misfortune commonly has the advantage over a man in being punctual. "I understand that Sir Matthew Broad is dead, most deplorably so, and Captain Bell suspected." A flicker, no more than that, passed behind the solicitor's glasses. "There has been an altercation. The police are naturally making inquiries, as they should, and Miss Broad is to leave England tonight. For rest only. My poor client is in a state of nervous collapse. Dr. Straker is of opinion that travel, with feminine attendance and a complete removal from painful associations. I have not engaged you to explain medicine to me," said Holmes mildly. "I prefer facts." A heavier tread struck the passage, and the next instant another man broke in upon us with the gusty abruptness of a door flung wide in wind. He was sunburnt, broad in the shoulder, and younger by 10 years than Dorrington. A small white scar crossed one cheekbone, his fair moustache was wet at the tips, and though he wore civilian clothes they sat upon him with that air of recent uniform which clings to the soldier long after he has put off his regimentals. "So you are the fellow from Baker Street," said he, looking from Holmes to myself and then to Nora with a force of feeling he did not disguise. "Thank God you have come. Bell is my name, Adrian Bell. If this house is not cleared of lies before night, the devil will have the choosing of us all." "Captain Bell," said Dorrington, with scarcely perceptible reproof, "your language does not mend a lamentable business." "It may yet mend the man who made it lamentable," cried Bell. Before more could pass, a third figure joined us from the room beyond, a delicate, dark-bearded gentleman with tired eyelids and an urbanity almost too complete to be quite humane. He wore grey gloves which he did not wholly remove even indoors, and had the custom, when embarrassed, of touching the lobe of his left ear with one finger. "Dr. Lionel Straker," said he. "I attend Miss Broad and attended Sir Matthew. I trust, Mr. Holmes, that if you are consulted it is in the interest of composure. This household has suffered enough excitement." "And so has Sir Matthew," said Holmes. A rough cough sounded from the open study door, and a square-shouldered inspector of the county police came out with a notebook in his hand. His florid face and practical eye marked the capable official. He bowed shortly. "Lascelles," said he. "Inspector, we are doing what is needful. Glad of any help that's help. Not so glad of theories." "An admirable position," said Holmes. "I aspire to it. May I see the room?" "If Miss Broad will retire first," said Dr. Straker. "No," cried she. "I go nowhere alone in this house." Holmes turned his head slightly. "Then Miss Broad remains where she can be seen. Watson, stay near her." He entered the study. I followed with the others hard upon us, and the first thing that struck me was the absence of the ordinary signs by which a dead man's room declares itself. The body had been removed. No sheet, no basin, no doctor's bag intruded upon the masculine order of the place. Yet death was there in the very air, stiffening it. There was a broad writing table near the fire, a high-backed chair fallen sideways upon the hearthrug, a cabinet of papers against the wall, and opposite the door a pair of long French windows whose curtains were half drawn over the night. Upon the polished inner surface of the study door, a little above the lock, the brass bolt still showed in place. Holmes went straight to it and laid one finger upon the metal. In the silence I heard again that minute dry sound, as if somewhere close at hand a tiny steel tooth were slipping backward over a wheel. "There is a slight drag here," said he. "Inspector, was that observed?" Lascelles came to his shoulder. "A mark on the wood?" "Yes, we took it for use." "Did you so? One should never take a fresh scar for age, nor a quiet man for honesty. Which was struck first in this room, the blow or the bolt?" The inspector opened his notebook. Sir Matthew was found at 6:40 past 6 by Mrs. Colby, who had brought in the lamp. He was upon the rug beside the table with an injury above the ear. This bronze paper weight lay near his hand. The French window was unlatched, and there were footprints on the terrace. Captain Bell had been seen leaving by that way after a violent disagreement half an hour earlier. The door was bolted on the inside. It was forced in by the gardener and footman. Holmes looked at the paperweight, a squat classical head in greenish bronze, and then at the carpet. There was blood upon the temple end of it, but less than I should have expected after a crushing blow. He knelt. I had often admired the extraordinary humility of his attitude before material things. A great intellect is never so great as when it becomes simple. "Sir Matthew died where he fell?" he asked. "So Dr. Straker believes." The physician gave a slight inclination of the head. The lesion was sufficient. Instantly fatal? Not beyond doubt. Rapidly so, I should say. Holmes's hand hovered for a second over the hearthrug, then moved to the chair, the desk, the edge of the fender. He stood and crossed to the French window. Rain had needled the outer panes, and beyond them the terrace shone like black slate under the lamps from the hall. He opened one leaf an inch, closed it again, and placed his finger upon the brass latch. "Captain Bell? You went out this way?" I did. Bell had planted himself by the mantel with arms folded and jaw thrust forward. He spoke like a man who has done with defence and is ready to fight. I went in by the window from the terrace, because I would not have Dorrington hear me ask Sir Matthew once more for Nora's hand. He refused. We used high words. He ordered me out, and I went out as I came. He was alive when I left him. If any man here says otherwise, he lies. You carried a cane? No. A paper knife? A crop? Anything that might bruise? My fists, if that contents you. I had no weapon. Lascelles turned a page. One of the maids heard harsh speaking. She heard Captain Bell say, "You shall not send her out like a parcel." "By heaven I did say it," cried Bell. And I'd say it again. Nora, who had remained near the door with one hand upon the panel, made a movement as if to go toward him, but checked herself under Dorrington's gliding look. Holmes turned to the solicitor. "And you, Miss Dorrington?" "I was in the morning room arranging certain regrettable business matters made necessary by Sir Matthew's death," said he. Before that I had been with him earlier in the afternoon upon legal questions connected with Miss Brode's settlement. We differed. Sir Matthew's temper was never among his prudent endowments. But when Captain Bell arrived I was no longer in the study. "At what hour did you leave it?" "Shortly after 6. "And what was the nature of the difference?" "I cannot discuss a client's private papers before a room." Holmes smiled. "Then perhaps we shall discuss the room before the papers." He had dropped upon one knee by the fallen chair, with a sudden motion so swift that I saw it only because I watched him closely. He picked something from the floor by the skirting and slipped it into his waistcoat pocket. When he rose his face was as blank as the wall. "Watson," said he, "would you oblige me by examining the brandy upon the side table?" I am curious whether Sir Matthew drank before or after his death. There was but one glass with a little amber spirit remaining. I smelt it and tasted a drop upon the tip of my tongue. "Brandy and soda," said I. "Nothing unusual. Nothing you recognise," said Holmes. "That is another matter." "Doctor," Straker's tired eyes sharpened. "Do you suggest poison?" "I suggest that a doctor who desires precision should not resent it in others." The physician's gloved finger went to his ear. "You will pardon me if I remember that you are not attached to the case in any official capacity, and you will pardon me if I remember that death does not wait for one." He moved again, not like a man searching, but like one reading. The ink upon the desk had been freshly blotted. The blotting book lay askew. A seal, a pen, a cut-glass tray, and a scattering of correspondence occupied the green leather surface, but a clean oblong in the dust upon one corner showed that some box or case of moderate size had lately stood there and was now removed. "That was Sir Matthew's deed box," said Nora in a low voice. "He kept private papers in it. It was here at luncheon. Where is it now?" No one answered. Holmes's eyes rested a moment upon Dorrington. The solicitor removed his glasses, breathed upon them, and polished them with a strip of silk. "An inventory has not yet been completed," said he. "So I perceive." Holmes bent over the grate. There had been a fire there, but not a recent blaze. He touched the ash lightly and looked at his finger. Then he selected with the tongs a curled fragment of darkened paper, no larger than a fingernail. "Burnt after the coal fell," said he, "and folded before it was burnt." "Curious. You speak as though everything were curious," said Lascelles. "Everything is, until it is ordinary." He crossed suddenly to Mrs. Colby, who had hovered in the background like a black pin thrust into the wall. "You found the body?" "Yes, sir, with the lamp." "Yes, sir, and the watch? It was by Sir Matthew's right hand when the gentleman broke in. Had you ever seen it before?" The housekeeper hesitated. "No, sir, not to my knowledge." Yet Miss Broad heard it in the passage. Mrs. Colby's hard face showed the first true emotion I had observed upon it. It was not surprise, but fear. "I do not heed fancies," said she. "You heed something," said Holmes. "What did Sir Matthew say to you after Mr. Dorrington left him this afternoon?" Her lips pinched inward. "He said there was villainy about, and that I was to admit no one to his room unless sent for." Dorrington spoke with soft reproof. "My good Colby, in your agitation you enlarge upon an impatient phrase." She turned her eyes on him, and for a flash of time I thought she might strike him. The moment passed. "Sir Matthew was angered," said she stiffly. "Indeed," said Holmes, "and yet Captain Bell was admitted." "Because Sir Matthew rang." Holmes went back to the door. The brass bolt was shot, since the door had been forced after the death and then reclosed. He drew it back and forward, listening. There came the small grating whisper of metal that has lately met resistance. He took out his lens. "What do you look for?" asked the inspector. "For the man who loves too neat a crime." "And have you found him?" "Not yet, but I have found his impatience." He stooped, and I saw his long forefinger pause beside a tiny black phoebe lodged where the bolt met the staple. He plucked it free, glanced at it, and, with the same remarkable secrecy as before, put it away. Bell had watched him with a fixed intensity. "You don't believe I did it," said he abruptly. Holmes did not turn. "I believe you are exactly the man whom a less intelligent murderer would choose." "Thank you," growled the captain. "I have had many compliments today, but none so useful." "What was the quarrel?" Bell glanced at Nora. "Must I say it here?" "She knows it," said Holmes. "Then Sir Matthew told me she had overtaxed herself, and was to travel. I said she needed no travel that began with a doctor's signature and ended under lock and key. He ordered me out. I accused Dorrington of putting the notion in his head, because Dorrington has long wanted his fingers in every drawer and every purse in this house. Sir Matthew struck the bell and told me if I did not leave instantly he would have me turned out. I went. And did you meet anyone on the terrace?" "No one." "Did you hear anything after you left?" Bell frowned. "Only, yes. When I was near the yew-walk I thought I heard a little ticking behind me, absurdly loud in the rain, as if some watch lay open upon a stone. I turned, but saw nothing." Nora gave a faint cry. You see. Dr. Straker shrugged his shoulders almost imperceptibly. The senses become fantastical under excitement. "So does good faith," said Holmes. He was at the desk again. The drawers had been opened and shut in haste. One stood a fraction of an inch proud of its fellows. Holmes drew it out. It contained memoranda, sealing wax, envelopes, 2 sovereigns, a lump of cobbler's wax black as pitch, and a narrow reel of stout silk, such as a man might use for documents or parcels. The reel had been recently cut. Dorrington's mild voice came behind us. Sir Matthew had all manner of rustic odds and ends among his correspondence. He wrapped specimen seeds and cuttings. Holmes looked over his shoulder with a brightness that was almost cheerful. Did he indeed? Then he possessed a more agricultural imagination than his table suggests. He closed the drawer and moved no farther for several seconds. When Holmes stood utterly still, I knew that his mind was ranging at speed. The room waited with him. The rain ticked on the panes. From somewhere beyond the corridor came the muted closing of a distant door, and with it, so faint that I could have sworn it only because the queer watch had tuned my ear, there stole again that dry backward whisper of metal, tick, 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 as though time itself, finding the house inhospitable, had turned and was retreating from it. Holmes raised his head. "Where is Miss Broad to spend the next 3 hours?" he asked. "In her room, under Mrs. Colby's care," said Dorrington. "In the drawing-room with me," said Captain Bell. "In quiet with a composing draught," said Dr. Straker. "In no place chosen by any of you," said Holmes. "She will remain with Dr. Watson until I advise otherwise." Dorrington's soft manner did not alter, but I saw the line at his jaw deepen. "Upon what authority?" "Upon my dislike of haste where papers, physicians, and young women are concerned. That is hardly legal. No, but it is often life-saving." The inspector shut his notebook. "Mr. Holmes, if you have anything more than wit, I should be obliged by it. And if you have a constable with sound boots and better ears than most, I should be obliged by him. Put a man outside the study window and another by the front drive. Let no carriage leave without my knowledge. Am I to understand there's danger? You are to understand that when too many people desire a lady's rest, the lady generally has reason to remain awake." Lascelles stared, grunted, and went out. It said much for Holmes's manner that even an independent provincial officer should obey an order which had not the least official substance behind it. "Now," said Holmes, "Mrs. Colby, kindly show me the room from which this house is governed, the servants' hall, butler's pantry, back passage, whatever corridor carries the truth when the drawing-room drops it. Watson, keep Miss Broad within your sight." He passed into the hall with the housekeeper. I had hardly drawn a chair for Nora near the study fire when Bell came to her side and then stopped, as if uncertain whether tenderness would injure more than reserve. "I would cut off my right hand to have kept you from this," said he. "Do not speak so," she answered. "If they hear feeling in your voice, they will twist it into guilt. They have twisted enough already." Dr. Straker, who had seated himself at the writing table with professional composure, tapped the unopened case of his stethoscope against one glove. "Captain Bell," said he, "if you value Miss Broad's tranquillity, you will moderate your temperament." Bell wheeled upon him. "And if you value your own skin, doctor, you will not offer her another draught until I know what sleep you deal in." Straker flushed for the first time. My medicine is not ordinarily submitted to barrack-room criticism. "Gentlemen," cried Nora. I stepped between them. There was in Bell's face a dangerous frankness which told everything and hid nothing. In Straker's, under his wearied polish, I thought I caught a glimmer of something colder. Not malice, perhaps, but a professional resentment that his superiority had been touched. Dorrington alone remained serene. He stood by the mantel, turning his glasses between finger and thumb, his eyes lowered as though upon a private calculation. I could not rid myself of the impression that the whole house was listening, not to us, but for something. The rain eased. Water dripped heavily from the laurel leaves outside. Twice Nora looked toward the passage, and twice I heard that tiny persistent ticking, so faint that it might have been fancy, yet always where no watch should have been. The interval before Holmes's return was one of the longest of my life, though it can have been scarcely 20 minutes. In a sick room a man may at least employ his hands, his voice, his training, but here I had only the office of watchfulness, and watchfulness without knowledge is a most exhausting labour. Miss Broad had drawn her chair close to the fire, yet she did not warm herself. Her gaze wandered from Bell to the passage, from the passage to the study window, from the window to the reticule in her lap. Once she opened it, touched the strange watch, and shut it again with a little shudder. "Do not," said I. She looked up almost apologetically. "I know it is childish, yet it seems to call for one." Bell heard her. "Give it to me," said he. I'll smash the infernal thing under my heel." "No," said a voice from the door. If ever a watch deserved to survive indignity, it is this one. Holmes came in with rain upon his shoulders and a look in his eyes which told me that the house had yielded something. Mrs. Colby followed him no farther than the threshold, and I noticed that her keys shook against her skirt. "Well?" cried Bell. Holmes took no notice. He drew a folded paper from his pocket, laid it beside the lamp, and addressed Miss Broad. "Have you eaten since morning?" She stared. "No, then you shall do so now. Watson, see to it. I am not hungry. No frightened person is. That is why frightened persons must be fed. Captain Bell, if your devotion can endure a practical turn, you will fetch from the dining room anything cold, solid, and immediate. Not wine." Bell went out like a shell from a gun. Holmes held the folded paper to the lamp, but did not open it. "Mr. Dorrington, before we proceed, I should be obliged if you would tell Inspector Lascelles precisely where Sir Matthew's deed box now is." The solicitor's lids drooped very slightly. "I have already said that the inventory, your inventory, interests me less than your memory. I decline to be hectored in a house of mourning. Then you prefer a house of search?" Dorrington's pallor deepened. For the first time the velvet of his voice roughened at the edge. "What is your meaning, sir? That you removed a box from the dead man's desk before the police made any inventory at all? And if I did, I am his solicitor." "You are Miss Broad's solicitor also, by a path she did not choose." Nora rose. "You had no right." "My dear young lady," said Dorrington, recovering his softness with visible effort, "my entire conduct has been for your protection. Your uncle, in one of his violent humours, had allowed Captain Bell to inflame your judgment. There were papers, highly unsuitable papers, which I removed lest they distress you. Then return them. At a proper time." Holmes slid the folded paper across the table. "Is this among the unsuitable matter?" Dorrington looked. It was a charred scrap, black on one side, but on the unconsumed inner fold there remained 3 words in Sir Matthew's bold hand, "If anything happens." A curious stillness fell. It was not the stillness of peace, but of animals scenting one another in the dark. "Where did you find that?" asked Dorrington. "In the grate, where haste had left it insufficiently murdered. The remainder may prove more communicative. Mrs. Colby has informed me that Sir Matthew, after your interview, shut himself in and wrote with great agitation. She heard him ring for sealing wax." The housekeeper gave a harsh little sound. "I did not say all that. You implied enough. Doctor." Straker lifted his gloved hands in expostulation. "This is intolerable. A fragment of burnt paper becomes an accusation. A distressed servant's impression becomes evidence. Surely we are not to surrender decorum wholly to conjecture?" Holmes turned his head. "Decorum, Doctor, is one of the first luxuries to leave a room where truth is throttled." At that moment Bell returned with a tray, bread, cold beef, and a dish of potatoes, which he set down with a clatter more eloquent than any oath. Holmes waited until Nora had, at his bidding and under my supervision, swallowed 2 or 3 mouthfuls and some water. "That is better," said he. "Now, Miss Broad, you will tell me of yesterday afternoon from the instant you first heard the watch in the passage." She pressed her fingers to her temple. "It was not the first time. I had heard it once 2 nights before, when I came down because I thought my uncle had called. The house was dark, only the lamp in the corridor burned. I heard a ticking near the study door, though the room was empty and locked. It ceased when I touched the handle. Yesterday I heard it again at about 5 o'clock, only for a moment. I thought someone was within, but when I looked there was no one in the passage." "Where were the others?" "Mr. Dorrington had arrived and was with my uncle. Doctor, Straker came not long after. Captain Bell was not expected until 6. Mrs. Colby was about the house. I did not see anyone else." "Did your uncle speak to you after 5? "Yes, he sent for me just before Mr. Dorrington went in. He was deeply disturbed. He said that if any paper were brought to me by Mr. Dorrington, or anyone acting with him, I was to sign nothing at all, until he himself or another adviser approved it. He said, I remember every syllable, there has been too much trust where no trust was earned. Then he kissed me, which he very rarely did, and bade me go. That was the last time I saw him alive. Why did you not tell this at once? I did tell it. Mr. Dorrington said my uncle's temper had outrun his judgment. Doctor, Straker said men who suffer from cerebral congestion are apt to distrust their best friends. Straker leaned back. Sir Matthew had all the symptoms of vascular disturbance. I gave that opinion in perfect good faith. And the composing draughts? Asked Holmes. For Miss Brode's insomnia. What was in them? A harmless bromide mixture. Prepared by yourself? At the surgery in the village. You will oblige me with the bottle. The physician hesitated. It is in Miss Brode's room. Then you will oblige me by fetching it. He rose slowly. I had an impression that his reluctance came not from guilt, but from offended dignity. Still, he went. Holmes turned in the same breath to Bell. Captain, when you crossed the terrace after your interview, where was your attention? On the devil's own temper, said he. And on Nora. Not on the house? No, did any window show light besides the study? Bell considered. The morning room was lit. Also, I think, the little room beyond the conservatory, the one Dorrington uses when he comes down. Nothing else that I marked. And upon the terrace itself? Nothing, not even a lantern. No, Holmes nodded and seemed to dismiss him. Yet I knew by the narrowing of his lids that some answer had fallen into place. Inspector Lascelles entered with his boots still muddy from outside. Constable says no carriage has moved. Front drive clear. Terrace clear. But the coachman reports there was a dog-cart sent away an hour ago by Mr. Dorrington's order to meet the late train from town. Dorrington bowed faintly. My clerk was expected with papers. What clerk? Asked Holmes. Mr. Elphick. Then when he arrives I shall be delighted to make his acquaintance. Lascelles sniffed. And the deed-box? Dorrington spread his hands. In my room, if you insist upon drama. Then I do insist, said Holmes. The box was fetched under protest. It proved to be a japanned case with brass corners and a patent lock. Dorrington produced a key. The box contained title deeds, memoranda, a draft codicil unsigned, and certain trust papers relating to Nora's mother's money. Holmes examined them rapidly, his long fingers sliding through the leaves with astonishing delicacy. Ah, said he very softly. What is it? I asked. He held up one paper. A petition for medical supervision in private care, prepared but not completed. One signature only. Dr. Straker's. Nora sprang to her feet. Then it is true. Dorrington spoke with controlled impatience. Perfectly true and perfectly proper. Your condition compelled consideration of temporary restraint. My condition. Yes, hallucinations, agitation, refusal of rational advice. Sir Matthew had at last come to see it. Holmes replaced the sheet. Had he? Then why is this other paper missing? He drew from the box a blank space rather than an object, for it was a clean rectangular impression in the dust of the lower tray that he indicated. Something lay here, said he. A packet, recently removed. One might even say removed since the box left the desk, for the dust around the impression has been disturbed by fingers. What was it? Dorrington's composure took a palpable blow. I cannot answer questions about every temporary enclosure in a client's box. But I can, rasped Mrs. Colby from the door. It was the bank packet, the one from Maddox's with the red wafer and the blue string. Sir Matthew showed it me himself and said, If I am found dead, Colby, remember that this goes to Miss Nora with my own hand or none. No one stirred. The effect of her words was as though some shutter had burst inward and let a harder air into the room. You lie from malice, said Dorrington, and the softness dropped from his voice like silk from a blade. The housekeeper advanced a step. "I've served this house 35 years. I dressed Miss Nora's mother for burial. I held Sir Matthew when his first fit took him. Don't you tell me of malice, you paper-faced thief. Enough." Cried Lascelles. Holmes had not taken his eyes from Dorrington. "Where is the bank packet?" The solicitor mastered himself by a visible effort. "In my possession. Naturally. Produce it." "It is sealed. It concerns trust matters of delicacy. Produce it." Dorrington drew from his inner breast pocket a large envelope sealed with red wax and tied with blue silk. The superscription, in a clerkly hand, bore Miss Nora Brode's name and the stamp of Maddox's bank. Holmes weighed it in his palm. "Too light," said he. "It contains papers, not paving stones." Holmes gave the packet to Lascelles. "Inspector, keep that. If anyone attempts to leave this house, search him. If anyone attempts to drug Miss Brode, arrest him. If anyone attempts to burn so much as a laundry bill, arrest him twice." There was a movement behind us. Dr. Straker had returned and stood in the doorway with a small blue-glass bottle in one hand. He had evidently heard enough to understand that the room had changed sides against him. I took the bottle from him. Holmes uncorked it, smelt, and passed it to me. "Chloral," said I instantly, "and a strong preparation, far from harmless." Miss Brode stared at the doctor with whitening face. "You gave me that?" "For sleep," said he in a low voice. "In proper dose it is no more than, in improper hands it is the old trick with a fashionable label," said Holmes. "Were you treating insomnia or manufacturing helplessness?" Straker's control broke. "I will not be baited. I acted under instruction, under anxiety, under the strain of a highly unmanageable household. Sir Matthew desired quiet. Mr. Dorrington desired quiet. The young lady was in a state bordering on hysteria. Bell made for him, and I caught the captain by both arms with no small effort. The doctor recoiled, one hand flying to his ear. "Sit down, all of you," cried Holmes with a force that rang like steel. "The man who killed Sir Matthew is not yet sufficiently desperate. Let us not waste him by noise." Even Dorrington obeyed the lash in his tone. Holmes walked once the length of the rug and back. His hands were behind him, his head bent. The watch in Nora's reticule gave suddenly, distinctly, 3 backward ticks in the hush. "Miss Brode," said he, "how much money passes under your control when the bank packet is opened?" "Nearly £40,000. "Unencumbered?" "Yes, save for certain small annuities." "And if you are declared mentally unsound before you sign?" Nora answered in a whisper. "Then the control remains with the acting trustee and legal adviser until the court appoints otherwise." Which is to say, Miss Dorrington, the solicitor, lifted his chin. "As a temporary fiduciary, yes, precisely, there is our named consequence. Watson, Miss Brode's liberty gone by 11, her fortune by noon. And perhaps her name for life. A compact little schedule. I admire economy in villains." Bell broke out. "Then why in God's name do you not charge him now?" Holmes's gaze flashed toward him. "Because the man who laid the snare is not always the man who struck the blow, and because if I move 1 inch too early, the essential proof may yet slip us. Mr. Dorrington, you will remain where you are. Dr. Straker, so will you. Inspector, if either gentleman takes 1 step without leave, put your hand upon him. Watson, your revolver is in your pocket?" "It is." "Excellent. Then we may perhaps catch time while it still runs, backward or otherwise." He stooped at once to Nora's reticule and took out the silver watch. With his knife he lifted the rear cover. Beneath the movement, tucked so flat that only a practised eye could have seen it without dismantling, there lay a tiny shred of blue silk thread, oily and blackened at one end. Holmes smiled without mirth. Just so. "What is it?" I cried. An impatience. The murderer, or the arranger if you prefer, repaired his own toy in haste and cut from what lay nearest to hand. He slipped the thread into an envelope. "Inspector, have you the packet with the blue string? Good. Compare the twist when I ask you, but not yet." He closed the watch again and put it in his pocket. Then, to my astonishment, he crossed to Dorrington and bowed. "My apologies, sir. I must ask the use of your room." "My room." "For 2 minutes only." Watson, with me. Without waiting for consent, he was already in the passage. I followed him down a narrow corridor into a small chamber near the conservatory, neat as a ship's cabin and smelling strongly of leather dispatch cases. Holmes shut the door. "Quickly, Watson, look at this." From his pocket he drew the object he had picked from the study skirting. It was a minute crescent of varnished wood with a pinhole through it, black on one face and raw on the other. "A fragment from the door-bolt staple?" said I. "No." "From a wedge." A cleverly paired wedge, japanned black to vanish against the skirting. It would hold a spring door open by a hair's breadth, or keep a bolt from seating if inserted and withdrawn by silk. Then the bolted room was a trick. A schoolboy trick, but effective against men who prefer the dramatic impossible to the ugly probable. Observe also this. He produced the black fibre from the staple. Silk, rubbed with cobbler's wax. Strong, quiet, it will draw a bolt, withdraw a wedge and vanish when cut. The reel lay in Sir Matthew's drawer, because the murderer used Sir Matthew's own materials. That is why the scene is too perfect. Perfection is the one mark nature never wears. Then, Dorrington, perhaps, yet do not be greedy. Greed is one thing at a time. We have a second hand in this business, and perhaps a third. Open that dispatch case. I did so. It was empty save for some stationery, a train timetable, and a small screw key used by watchmakers or instrument men. Holmes took it with quick satisfaction. "Ah, and that proves?" "It proves that a solicitor may cultivate hobbies, nothing more. But it interests me exceedingly." Now the other drawer. There lay, among collars and gloves, a tin of black wax, a railway guard's lamp key, and a folded receipt from a jeweller in Clerkenwell for cleaning and repairing one repeater watch. The name upon it was not Dorrington's, but Elphick's. "Elphick, the clerk expected from town," I exclaimed. "Or conveniently expected," said Holmes. "Take the receipt. Replace the rest. Not a sound." He opened the door a crack. Somewhere in the house a board creaked. Somewhere else a woman cried out sharply and was silenced. Holmes's face hardened. "That came from the upper corridor," said he. "Our clock shortens. Come, we found the source of the outcry upon the upper landing, where a frightened housemaid stood wringing her apron before an open trunk." Mrs. Colby had one hand on the girl's shoulder and the other on a lamp. The yellow light fell upon articles so sinister in their quiet domesticity that my heart turned cold at the sight. Travelling rugs. A dark cloak. A bonnet with its strings tied for haste, a flask, the blue glass chloral bottle, and in a side compartment a pair of broad padded straps with buckles such as are used in certain hospitals to restrain the violent. Miss Broad, who had followed in spite of my effort to detain her, gave a low moan and put both hands to her mouth. "Those are not mine," said she. "No," answered Mrs. Colby, in her hard old voice. "They were packed after dusk by order. I would not have said it, for I hoped to get you clear first, but there they are, and shame on the hands that laid them in." Holmes took up the straps, turned one over, and looked at the maker's stamp. "Private Infirmary Suppliers," said he. "Quite tasteful. Mr. Dorrington prepares for possibilities with excellent finish." On the trunk tray there lay also a railway envelope, unsealed, containing a note in Dorrington's hand to one Dr. Alistair Purvis at Woking, asking that he meet the 11 o'clock train and lend his professional opinion to the case of a young lady whose delusions had become dangerous. The words were smooth and colourless. That was the worst of them. "It is all of a piece," said Holmes. "The form, the straps, the draught, the punctual doctor, the foreign removal. You see now, Watson, Why men of method are so formidable when they lack conscience. They do not rage. They schedule. Miss Broad swayed, and I put her at once into a chair in the corridor and made her breathe from my flask. She mastered herself with a courage which from that instant won my deepest respect. "I will not faint," said she. "Only tell me what I must do." "Exactly what I ask and not one thing more," said Holmes. "Courage is obedience under intelligence. Panic is obedience under fear." He took the unsealed note, folded it and slipped it away. Then he turned to Mrs. Colby. "You spoke of Sir Matthew's command concerning the bank packet. Did he place any other paper beyond Mr. Dorrington's reach?" The old woman's face worked. "I do not know for certain, sir, but when he rang for wax he had the blotting book open, and after Mr. Dorrington came again he would not let me touch the hearth. He sent me away twice. There was something under his hand when I entered the second time, and something gone when I entered after the crash." Holmes's eyes flashed. "The blotting book, Watson." We were down the stair and in the study again before the word had died, so swift was his movement. Lascelles still held the room. Dorrington, seated but not easy, looked up with controlled inquiry. Dr. Straker had resumed his air of injured gentility. Bell stood like a man chained at the edge of action. Holmes took the blotting book from the desk and carried it to the lamp. There were several used leaves. He chose the uppermost, bent it sidewise to the light, and smiled. "Graphite, if you please," said he. I gave him my pencil. With the flat of the lead most delicately applied, he shaded the blank underside of the next page. At once there came out from the pressure traces of the writing above it the ghost of a hand, broken, hurried, but legible enough in fragments. "If anything happens to M.E. Dorrington, trust no paper. Packet in black clock. Bell innocent." The last line trailed off in a mere furrow. No courtroom evidence could have struck the room with a sharper force. Bell uttered a great breath that was half oath and half thanksgiving. Nora caught at the table to support herself. Even Lascelles lost for an instant the square impassivity of the police officer, and stared as if some dead man's knuckles had rapped from below the desk. Dorrington did not start. That, I think, was the measure of the man. He only removed his glasses, wiped them with care, and said in a voice from which the warmth had wholly gone, a highly theatrical reconstruction. "One can raise any phantom from dents in paper if one is imaginative enough." "Quite so," said Holmes. "And one can lower a very solid gentleman into the dock by combining dents in paper with waxed silk. Japanned wedges, forged medical forms, chloral, a replaced bank packet, a repaired watch, and an attempted locked room. Inspector, Captain Bell is cleared in my mind, and in yours he should be at least no longer your first quarry. Mr. Dorrington is not yet arrested because I lack the final physical bridge between his admirable preparation and Sir Matthew's skull." But we approached the bridgehead. Lascelles drew himself up. "And this black clock? Where is it, Mrs. Colby?" "In the west loft above the coach-house, sir. An old long-case clock from the first house. Stopped these 20 years. Sir Matthew would not have it indoors because of the tick." Holmes gave one quick glance round the room. "Good. Miss Broad stays with Watson. Captain Bell and the inspector come with me. Mr. Dorrington, Dr. Straker, you remain here." "Indeed I do not," said Dorrington. "I protest against this grotesque treatment." "You may protest to the moon if you wish," said Bell. "Only stay where you are. It cost me something to remain behind when every nerve in me urged pursuit." Yet Holmes had spoken, and I knew too well the folly of deserting the person whose safety had become the centre of the case. So I stayed with Nora by the study fire, while the others crossed the yard with lamps. Through the streaming pane I could see them as moving points of yellow in the blackness, mounting toward the loft over the coach-house. The wait was torture. Nora neither sat nor stood for long. She crossed the rug, paused, listened, returned. Once she laid her hand on my sleeve. "Dr. Watson," said she, "if my uncle named Captain Bell innocent, then he meant to save him. But why did he not name the murderer outright? Because he was struck before he could finish, said I. Or because he feared that if he wrote the name the paper would never survive. Her quickness impressed me. That also is possible. She turned her face toward the hall. Then Mr. Holmes must find what my uncle hid where a solicitor would not look. The very instant she said it I heard, from far off over the yard, the old uncanny ticking again. It was not loud, yet in the stillness it seemed to run across the wet darkness like a thread drawn through cloth. Nora heard it also. I saw the blood retreat from her lips, that sound. She whispered. I had my revolver out before I knew that I had moved. The study door, left half open, gave on the hall. No one stood there. The ticking ceased. Then there came from outside a shout, Bell's voice, followed by the heavy clatter of feet on wood and Holmes's sharper cry. Back. All back. I took Nora by the arm and drew her into the hall. By then the others were already returning from the yard, Holmes first, lantern in one hand, the other upon the sleeve of Inspector Lascelles, whose face under the lamplight was flushed and angry. Well? I cried. Empty, said Holmes. The case in the clock is empty, but warm. Warm? By the lantern we found inside it, said Bell harshly. Someone had been there within minutes. There's a panel in the back of the case and fresh oil on the catch. We were too late by a quarter hour, if that. Lascelles added with bitter mortification, and there was a little watch ticking on the shelf behind the case. One of those damned things. It stopped when I picked it up. Nothing attached to it but a broken silk loop. Holmes set the lantern down and held out his hand. The inspector gave him the object. It was not the same silver watch, but a smaller open-faced movement mounted in a blackened frame, clumsy in workmanship, evidently contrived for use rather than ornament. Heavy oil clung to its spindle, a blue silk loop, frayed and cut, hung from one side. The workshop copy, said Holmes softly. Then the title-piece was not the only actor upon the stage. He practised. Miss Broad stared. It was all to make me hear it. To make me seem. To make you singular, said Holmes, until singularity might be called unsoundness. Yes, that is the reversal of our case. Sir Matthew's murder was not born in the quarrel with Bell. The quarrel was only the weather chosen for it. The true design began earlier, in tests, sounds, papers, and the careful isolation of the one witness whose word most mattered. Bell struck the mantel with his fist. Then arrest him now. Holmes shook his head. I am nearer, not at the end. The hidden compartment is empty. The true packet has been moved again. If Dorrington carries it on his person, he may still claim he took it for safekeeping. If it be found torn or burnt without a witness, he may still wriggle. I want him with the thing in his hand and purpose on his face. Purpose enough shines there already, growled Bell. Dorrington, who had not changed position throughout the exchange, gave a slight disdainful inclination. You have a genius, Mr. Holmes, for ornamenting suspicion. And you, said Holmes, for underestimating servants. He turned to Mrs. Colby, who besides Mr. Dorrington knew of the West Loft clock. No one in the house, if you mean from Sir Matthew, said she. But Mr. Dorrington has keys where keys were never given him. I've said it this 12-month. Holmes nodded. We now enter the active portion of the evening. Watson, bring Miss Broad to the dining-room. She must eat again and remain under your eye. Captain Bell, you will accompany me to the stable-yard for a word. Inspector, keep Mr. Dorrington and Dr. Straker in the study. Let them believe you bored rather than vigilant. Mrs. Colby, if any servant sees a lamp moving in the west grounds or hears a carriage before I call for it, send word without noise. And what of me? Asked Nora. Holmes faced her fully. There was no dryness in his manner now. You will trust me for 1 hour more. If I fail within that hour, your enemies regain the advantage of the clock. If I succeed, they do not touch you again. She bowed her head. I trust you entirely. Do not do that, said Holmes. Trust is a poor habit. Obedience is enough." Yet as he said it, there was in his glance one of those rare lights by which I knew how deeply the loyalty of the oppressed could move him. In the dining room he ate nothing, and drank only half a cup of cold coffee while he wrote 3 notes in rapid succession. One he gave to Belle, one to Lascelles, and one to me. "You will open yours only if you hear my whistle, and not before," said he. "Until then, Miss Broad does not leave your side. If anyone comes with my name, shoot the lock before you trust the messenger. Holmes, my dear Watson, I am merely bringing your military education into polite society." He buttoned his coat to the throat, set his soft hat low, and vanished by the service passage with Belle at his heels. Through the gap of the door I saw the stable lantern swing once in the wet yard and disappear. The rain had ceased altogether now. In its place the night had drawn down cold and bare, and from somewhere among the eaves or sheds there floated once more that dry little retreating tick, like a thing that moved away whenever one approached it, and yet was always at one's shoulder. I do not know by what minute hand the house moved after Holmes vanished, for no clock within doors would tell us, yet every creature in it seemed to hear the approach of the appointed hour. The servants went more softly than before. Lamps were trimmed and turned lower. Once a wheel ground upon gravel far down the drive, and then passed on again, and Nora started so violently that her fork fell ringing upon the plate. I made her sit close to the fire and forced upon her a little more food. She obeyed me with the docility of great fatigue, though her head was lifted all the while like that of a deer which feeds and listens together. From the hall there reached us at intervals the murmur of men's voices. Once Dr. Straker crossed the doorway under a constable's eye, and asked in a constrained manner for permission to wash his hands, as though that small professional ceremony might save some remnant of his dignity. Again I heard Belle somewhere in the yard, speaking low to a groom. Dorrington I neither saw nor heard, but his silence pressed upon the room more than noise would have done. Nora had scarcely touched the cup I placed beside her, when there came from outside, very far off and thin in the cold, a single clear whistle. I had the note open in an instant. "Bring Miss Broad by the little baize door at the back of the dining room to the stable passage. No lamp, no speech. If interrupted, go on." "H, come," said I. She was on her feet before the word had fully left me. The baize door opened upon a service passage smelling of coal dust and polish. At its farther end a groom held a dark lantern with the slide shut. He pointed mutely. We passed him, turned left through the scullery, and came out under a covered way into the stable yard, where the wet stones shone dimly in the starlight that had broken at last through the cloud. Holmes stood in the shadow of the coach-house arch. Belle was with him, and Inspector Lascelles, though the latter had exchanged his official prominence for a rough coat and cap. There was no sign of agitation in Holmes. That in itself was ominous. He took Nora's hand for one instant only. "Not a sound," said he. "You are safe while you keep still." He placed us behind a stack of fodder sacks within the open shed from which the dog-cart was drawn. From there, through a chink between the sacks, I could command the yard, the coach-house doors, and part of the drive. One horse was harnessed to a closed brougham. The lamps were dark. Beside it waited the coachman, a broad fellow muffled to the chin. I looked twice before I knew him for Holmes's chosen man from the village police. Another constable crouched by the wheel. The arrangement had in it something of the stage, yet the black yard, the wet boards, and the mortal issues that hung upon our silence gave it a reality so sharp that my own breathing seemed a dangerous indiscretion. Holmes bent his lips to my ear. Dorrington has swallowed the bait. Lascelles let him think the packet in police keeping would be taken at once to the local station and opened in the morning. He has vanished from the study within the last 2 minutes by a side passage which Belle showed me. Where will he go? Not to flight. He cannot leave without the papers he has hidden. Not to the loft. That was searched. Therefore, to the carriage. To the carriage? The lamp, Watson. The lamp key in his drawer. The dog-cart sent for the fictitious clerk. The one conveyance meant to pass the gates under an innocent pretext. He dared not keep the true packet on his person while the house was alert. He dared not leave it in his room after my search. He put it where movement was expected. Observe, we had not long to wait. A door clicked softly within the house. A strip of yellow showed and vanished. Then a figure glided along the wall from the direction of the side entrance and paused by the bram. Even in the darkness there was no mistaking the spare correctness of the man. Dorrington wore a dark overcoat and carried no lamp. He moved with infinite caution, one gloved hand already in his pocket. He listened. The yard was still. A horse stamped once and tossed its head. From very near us there came a faint metallic tick. Nora gripped my wrist so fiercely that her nails cut the skin. Dorrington stooped to the left carriage lamp. I saw the brief glimmer of metal as he used a key. The lamp front opened. He thrust in his hand up to the wrist and began to draw something through the mouth of the casing. "Now," whispered Holmes. The yard sprang into life. Lascelles was on him from one side, Bell from the other, Holmes straight in front. Dorrington gave one savage wrench and almost freed the object. It stuck. With a movement swift as the striking of a snake, he dropped the key and snatched from his sleeve a short weighted cosh of plated leather. The thing whistled through the air at Bell's temple. Bell reeled, though he kept his feet. Before I could clear the sacks, Holmes had caught Dorrington's wrist with both hands and twisted it inward so sharply that the cosh fell clattering upon the stones. "Careful," cried Holmes. "He kills with his sleeve." Dorrington fought like a silent maniac. There was no oath, no outburst, no plea, only a horrible concentrated fury, but more dreadful for being so restrained. He tore free one arm, struck at Holmes's throat, lurched, and would have gone down under Lascelles's grip had he not by some desperate effort wrenched half round and driven his shoulder against the inspector's chest. The four of them staggered into the lightless side of the carriage. The horse plunged. The constable at the wheel shouted. I had Nora thrust behind me and my revolver out, yet the struggle whirled so close and so darkly among the shafts that to fire would have been murder. Then Bell, with the blood running down beside his ear, closed in once more and took Dorrington full across the body as a football player takes his man. They went heavily down upon the stones and the packet. A long sealed envelope, blackened with soot and oil, flew out from the lamp mouth and skidded almost to my feet. Holmes had the cuffs on him within 10 seconds. It was done with astonishing neatness. One moment there was a writhing knot of men, breath, boots, and wet cloth. The next Dorrington was on one knee, his hat gone, his hair across his forehead, and the steel shining upon his wrists. Nora had come from cover. She stood in the open yard, very pale but steady. "That is my packet," said she. Holmes picked it up and placed it in her hands. "It is now." Dorrington lifted his head. Never have I seen in any human face a hatred so complete and so bloodless. It was not for Bell, nor for the inspector, nor even for Holmes. It was for the woman whose freedom had escaped him by inches. "You fool," said he to her, and his voice, stripped of its velvet, was thin and ugly. "You ignorant little fool. Do you think this clears you? Do you think society cares what such men as these say? One certificate more, one doubt spoken in the proper room, and you are done." Bell made a movement, but Holmes's hand checked him. "No," said Holmes, "not one doubt more. The game is over." "It is not over," cried Dorrington. "You have found an envelope in a lamp. A solicitor may place papers where he pleases. A lady may prefer scandal to guidance. An old man with apoplexy may scrawl any nonsense before he drops. And Bell quarrelled with him. Bell was seen. Bell fled by the window." Bell is innocent," said Nora with sudden fire, "and you know it." Dorrington laughed. It was the first sound of feeling I had heard from him, and it chilled me more than his fury. Knowledge is a poor thing without proof. "That," said Holmes, "is a maxim upon which you have lived. Permit me to repay it." He stooped, picked up the fallen cosh, and held it by the thong. The leather head was rounded with lead beneath the plating. Along one seam there clung a dark crust. "Watson," I came forward. By the light of Lascelles's open lantern I examined it. "Blood," said I. "And, yes, minute green particles." "Bronze from the paperweight after impact," said Holmes. "You struck Sir Matthew first with this sleeve sap to fell and stun him, then once with the bronze head from the hearth to right Captain Bell upon the wound. It was an excellent attempt, save that you cleaned the bronze too thoroughly and the leather not enough." Dorrington's eyelids flickered. It was the first true sign that he had been hit. Holmes continued, still in that level voice which he used when the net had drawn close, and words were only the tightening cord. "You drugged the brandy with chloral stolen or borrowed from Doctor. Straker's practice, counting on his vanity and previous opinions to cover your use of it. You returned after Bell had left, forced Sir Matthew to give up the clock hiding place, struck him, and then staged a locked room with the waxed silken wedge. The watch was your private masterpiece. You used it beforehand to make Miss Broad hear what no one else admitted, and on the night itself you dropped it by the body, because madness and miracle together suited you. But you repaired its broken hinge in haste with silk from the packet string. Your own hand stitched motive to mechanism. There in the cold yard, with the horse steaming and the lantern light blowing across the stones, Holmes gave the only direct summing of the case that ever passed his lips, and because every point in it had already touched the senses before it touched the understanding, it came not as an argument, but as the sudden visible shape of truth. Dorrington said nothing. His face had become curiously small, as if the man were shrinking inside it. Inspector Lascelles took the cosh from me. "That'll do finely," said he. "And the packet?" Holmes nodded to Nora. "Open it here." She broke the seal with trembling fingers. Within lay not only the trust documents from Maddox's bank, but a second folded paper in Sir Matthew's hand, signed and witnessed in brief form by Mrs. Colby, who had followed us unseen into the yard and now stood just within the coach-house gate, with her shawl about her shoulders. It was a declaration revoking Dorrington's authority in all matters touching Nora Broad's property and person, appointing in his place the firm of Felton and Graves of Lincoln's Inn, and stating in plain terms that if harm befell him, suspicion should attach to Jasper Dorrington, who had attempted for months to procure private control over Miss Broad by representing her sane fears as delusions. Under that declaration Sir Matthew had scrawled an additional line, jagged and cramped, as if written with the strength failing out of him, Bell hot-headed but true. "Keep Nora from the doctor." Nora bent over it with a broken cry. "Mrs." Colby covered her face. Bell turned sharply away and stared into the dark yard, his broad shoulders shaking once. "Doctor." Straker's voice came from behind us with ghastly thinness. He had come out to the threshold and was staring from the paper to Dorrington as a man stares at a mirror that has suddenly reflected his soul uglier than he had believed it to be. "I never meant," he began. "No," said Holmes. "You meant to be important, trusted and uncontradicted. It has carried many a smaller man into very large villainies. Be thankful that yours stopped short of murder." Straker gave a sickly bow of the head and said no more. Dorrington looked from one face to another. The fight had gone out of him. What remained was calculation, still working, still trying the bars. "There is no witness to the striking," said he. "There is the pattern," returned Holmes. "There is the drugged glass, the forged confinement papers, the hidden packet, the altered watch, the waxed silk, your alias with the jeweller, the cosh from your sleeve, the blood upon it, the bronze grains, the false clerk, the lamp key, Sir Matthew's writing, and your attempt this instant to recover that which would ruin you. You have always preferred accumulations to hazards, Mr. Dorrington. So do the courts." Lascelles gave a grunt of satisfaction. "Take him," said he to the constables. As they led him away across the stones, the queer little ticking sounded once more. We all heard it and turned. Holmes stooped by the fallen key near the lamp. Fastened to its ring by a frayed bit of silk was the smaller blackened practice watch from the loft, which Dorrington must have carried as part tool and part talisman. It had started again in the struggle. Holmes crushed it under his heel. The ticking ceased. "That," said he, "is the only backward time I care to hear tonight." There followed, as there must always follow after the snapping of a great tension, a kind of human untidiness. Men spoke all at once. Doors opened. Servants who had been frozen into silence thawed into whispers. Bell would have taken Nora in his arms had not the habits of a decent house restrained him at the final inch, yet the look between them made restraint itself eloquent. Lascelles marched his prisoner indoors. Mrs. Colby, with grim practicality, demanded hot water for Captain Bell's cut. Doc Straker asked in a low voice whether he might withdraw before the house had done despising him, to which Holmes answered only by turning his back. I was binding Bell's temple in the harness room when Holmes entered and leaned for a moment against the table, his eyes half closed. He looked suddenly tired, less with bodily fatigue than with that reaction which comes when an active mind can at last afford to feel the cold. "You are hurt yourself," said I, for there was a torn place in his cuff and a reddening mark along his throat. "An affectionate farewell from the late adviser to Miss Broad," said he. "No more. How goes our soldier?" "A cut only," said Bell. "I've had worse from a polo ball." He caught Holmes's hand in both of his with a warmth that, from so robust and direct a man, was affecting in the extreme. "Mr. Holmes," said he, "you have given me back my honour, and, if she will have me, my life." Holmes gently disengaged himself. "Then use both with better judgment than you used your temper this afternoon." Bell actually laughed, despite the blood and plaster. I deserve that. He went out at Mrs. Colby's summons, and Holmes sat down upon the edge of the table while I replaced the stopper in the iodine. "You knew it in the yard," said I. "Not merely suspected, knew it." Of course I knew it when I saw him go to the carriage lamp. Before that I was morally certain. After it, certain enough for Scotland Yard and the county bench together. And Straker? A vain accessory to oppression, not to murder. Dorrington used the doctor's prior opinion of Miss Broad, stole or wheedled enough chloral to keep her dulled, and relied upon professional amour propre to make Straker defend his own mistakes. A most common mechanism, my dear Watson. You have observed how often one sin hires another without sharing wages with it. And the watch? Holmes drew the silver hunting watch from his pocket, opened it, and laid it in my hand. Ingenious, is it not? A cheap old movement altered by reversing the click and ratchet, so that the hand crawls backward, while the tick remains natural enough to travel through a passage. A toy for a mechanician, but in the right nerves a diabolical toy. Dorrington had it repaired under his clerk's name when he overstrained the hinge during practice. He used copies as well. The sound in the corridor was the bait. The backward hand, once shown, was the guarantee that Miss Broad would be thought imaginative at best, unstable at worst. When Sir Matthew discovered the larger scheme, the pretty instrument was too useful to waste, so it went beside the body as a final flourish. And that was why you crushed the smaller one. It had had a long evening and deserved rest. He slipped the silver watch shut. I think, however, that this original should be destroyed in Miss Broad's presence when the legal gentlemen have done admiring it. We returned to the hall together. The house was altered already. Fear had not gone, but it had changed owners. Nora stood by the study fire with the recovered papers upon the table before her. Mrs. Colby had removed the travelling straps from sight. Bell was near, not touching her, yet plainly held there by something stronger than touch. Lascelles from the doorway informed us that a message had been sent to headquarters, and that Dorrington, once searched, had yielded among other articles a second key to the deed box, several medical forms signed in blank by a fashionable alienist in town, and correspondence proving that Elphick existed chiefly upon paper. Nora came to Holmes with both hands extended. "How shall I thank you?" she said. "My dear young lady," said Holmes, "if gratitude must spend itself, let it fall upon Mrs. Colby, who kept her conscience in working order when more educated machinery broke down. The old housekeeper coloured to the roots of her iron-grey hair and muttered something about plain duty. It was one of the pleasantest moments of the night to see Holmes, who could be so ruthless to pretension, uncover his tenderness before fidelity. There remained yet one thing to do. Nora saw it in his face before he spoke. She drew the silver watch from the table where he had laid it, and looked at it for a long instant while the backward hand crept over its tiny circle. "It has haunted me," said she. "Let it not haunt anyone else." Holmes held out his palm. She placed the watch in it. He set it upon the stone of the hearth, took the bronze paper weight, the dead man's false accuser, and with one clean stroke shattered glass, wheel, spring, and case into a scatter of shining ruin. A little metallic chatter, shrinking and irregular, broke from it as it died. "There," said Holmes. "Time resumes its manners." The fragments were swept away. Mrs. Colby drew the curtains. A servant brought fresh coal. Common things re-entered the room one by one, and with them that blessed dullness in which civilized life does its healing. Yet I could not look upon the hearth without seeing in imagination the broken toy that had so nearly carried a brave woman into silence and bondage. When at last there was nothing further required of us, Holmes took up his coat. Bell had gone to telegraph Felton and Graves. Lascelles had his prisoner. Dr. Straker had vanished from the house as noiselessly as self-respect departing. Nora stood composed beside Mrs. Colby, very pale, very young, and, for the first time since she had entered Baker Street, unmistakably free. We stepped out beneath the paling eastern sky. The clouds had thinned to rags above the trees, and one cold star still shone over the wet laurels. Our dog-cart waited. As I set my foot on the step, I found myself listening instinctively for that thin, malignant ticking. There was none. Only the drip from branch to gravel, the stir of the horse, and the first honest cry of a waking bird from the dark hedge. Holmes drew his collar up and glanced back once at the long black line of the house. "It is curious, Watson," said he, "how often the gravest crimes are committed, not for passion, but for administration. A dagger is romantic, a pistol noisy, but the neat ruin of a soul by paper, draught, and punctual conveyance. That is a villainy for the modern age. We must be grateful that even now a broken spring may still upset it.